Hello, we're now on to part B of this fabulous strategy of informal early feedback to enhance teaching and learning. And so what we're going to do is to remind you and reel back the tape a little bit, because we want to make sure that you got these critical messages that we want you to remember. So first of all, the key terms of assessment versus evaluation. Remember, assessment is to sit beside, to get timely feedback about the teaching and learning, and evaluation means it's at the end to determine the value or the worth of something, like yes, it's good, no, we should stop, I'm not sure what we should be doing on there. And it's at the very end, so it's making a judgment. And so when we talk about assessment and evaluation, there are two more terms that I wanted you to add on to this. And so when we talk about formative assessment, we're talking about this, and we're talking about evaluation. We use the word summative evaluation. Formative, remember, to get timely information, summative at the end, and we're only going to focus on this part, on the formative assessment. So therefore, we are now going on to the second learning goal, which I've identified, and you get to create appropriate items to gather feedback. What is really important? Appropriate, because there are items there which does not make sense, or it's incorrectly written, or things that you cannot change. So appropriate is a word that we're going to be focusing on now. And so I want you to remember a thought on here. When we talked about getting feedback from our students, it's a systematic method. The systematic method we're talking about is the informal early feedback. This instrument uses both rated and open items, and also, and I'm going to use this metaphor, though it doesn't quite fit this image, which is keep, stop, and start. Okay, and let me show you what that means by keep, stop, and start. Here are some open-ended questions which can give you a hint. When I say keep doing, that means it's been very helpful and we should keep doing. Stop doing, like it adds no value. Matter of fact, it may be even a hindrance. And start doing are suggestions that you may hear from the students or from your peers, or you may be particularly insightful and say, you know what, this is what I should start beginning to implement now. So remember in the earlier video where Karen Lewis did this macro study of all of this research done about effective teaching. And so she identified 9 characteristics here. And we had asked you to say, well, what is it that the students see and feel and hear about these characteristics? So I want you to take a moment to look over this list, and you're going to think again about it. When you look at these characters, what is it that you want to know? You will, from your own perspective, like, do you want to know, like, did these assignments work? Did the examples, did it make sense? Do they still work? And some other things you might want to ask about explanation is it clear? Do I really seek out the students' answers and opinions? Why or why not? Am I successful in getting students to participate? So here's an activity. Get another piece of paper, and I want you to look at these characteristics here. And you're saying, what are some of these that you're interested in getting more information about? And that's okay. If you want to get all 9, go and do it. Or if there's some ones that you want to highlight, go and write those down there. So, did you go and identify some? Here are some sample IEF questions, and their aspects, remember, about teaching and learning. And so, do you tell me whether it's a T for teaching or an L for learning? How would you characterize the teacher's ability to explain? I hope you wrote T for teaching. It taps about teaching. Indicate the level of understanding you have, you feel about the concepts covered. That is learning. Are you keeping up with the reading? Barely, sometimes, absolutely yes. That is also learning. The grading is fair. That is asking a question about teaching, so you should have teaching on there. Okay, what do you want to learn about? Let's think about that. Remember, you had identified some areas on there, and I want you to put 2-column table right there and write it down again and explain maybe what specifically you want to ask about. Not just the area, but a specific item you want to write. Okay, now remember an IEF taps on teaching and learning. I want you to ask yourself, I have this great opportunity. What should I ask my students? And while you were thinking, I went ahead and jotted some ideas. Here's some things. You ask the students, do you feel comfortable asking questions in class? Please explain. How's your student team doing? Because I have a great important project at the end and I want them to all be successful. Are you going to office hours? Why or why not? Why don't you go ahead and ask some specific questions that you want to ask your students about their learning and how they are doing. Okay, now you wrote some items and we don't know how good they are. Remember, we had to ask that they're effective and they're appropriate. So here are some items that for us to analyze. Let's look at the first one. The content and the delivery of the lecture are clear. It's a bad one. It's a bad item. Why is it? Well, you have two things, the content and the delivery. And they're going, Professor, which one do you want us to answer? So make sure you only have one subject, one topic per item. So let's talk about, let's use the word content. Say we're going to ask about content. So let's look at these. This is the response, and when we look at the anchor items, which is called strongly agree or strongly disagree, and the question is, the content of the lecture is clear. Do we use strongly agree, strongly disagree, or should we use almost always or almost never? Which one do you think it is? I hope you chose the second one. The second one is a much better response on there. You want to know, is it frequently, almost always, almost never? All right? So 2 lessons. 1, make sure that there's only one topic that you are asking about, and make sure that the Likert items, the anchors, make sense for you. Here, this is a poor item. Do you want to change it in any way? Yeah. No. That doesn't help you any. So you need to make sure you say, please explain and give me a little bit more information. Now, I work with a lot of faculty on our campus because to create their own IEF and individualize just for themselves. So I'm going to share with you one of them. Make sure that you put in there a module on there so that you know which of the modules you're teaching and also when you are doing, which is the semester on there. Start with a positive on there. The instructor is enthusiastic. Start with a positive, a known item about you. And then after that, tap into some other items such as explanations and grading and also how well organized it is. And then some of these don't have to be an item per characteristic. So for instance, if we go to this one, we can see that we tapped into many items in just one. And there you can get a rating about which ones are most important on there. It's always good to also have an overall global item, like rate the instructor and rate the course. What you can see here, you don't always have to have a 5-point. You can use just 3, and that gives you enough information. So for instance, the balance in this course, more theory, just right, more real world. That gives you enough information, just like the pace of the course. Too fast, just right, too slow. And it's so important that you do in there, like periodically I use the word please explain, because the numbers don't make sense by themselves. You need to hear why the students responded in the way they did. And when you have a please explain, give them enough space to do this. Now, here are some additional items, and this is the one that I want to show you about learning. I read the textbook before coming to class, almost always, sometimes, almost never. Now, I don't know about your students, but ours are pretty honest. And they go, sometimes, almost never. Now, don't yell at them. Don't yell at them, because you need to read the please explain. And what if they say, I read the text before coming to class, and they say it's because it's too difficult. Well, what are you going to do? Then maybe you should give them some supplemental information that's more at their level. What if they say, I don't do it because it's too long? And you still want them to read it. So maybe you'll say, out of pages 1 through 30, if you're short in time, please make sure you focus on pages 10 through 15. And what if they say, I don't need to? And you go, well, why? And you say, well, because when you give us an exam, you only talk about what you presented in the class, and we don't ever have to read the book. Now, think about that. If you really think the book is important, then maybe you should add some items in your exam about the textbook. And then there's some other items on there. I want you to also focus on this one, the comments. These open-ended questions about about the aspects about the instructor, of course, is helpful. And what suggestions do you have? That sounds very close to keep, stop, start. I like letter C, which is what can you do yourself to learn better? And because it's a partnership, and the students can be reflected to say, you know what, it's not just about you, there are things that I can also do to learn better. And these are really good because it's very reflective on there. So I'm going to have an activity now for you, and you're going to start your individualized informal early feedback. Here are the directions. Have at least one rated and one open-ended questions. Make sure that you look at the anchors, that it makes sense. You don't always have to use a 5-point or a 3-point. And make sure that if you want to know more about why they gave that number that you did, put in please explain. And tap the teaching and learning areas on there. Remember, it's 2 things, teaching and learning. And the third one, why are you interested in this information? Remember, it's because it's things that you could do right away that's timely on there. And after you've done this activity, share your questions with your colleague, because I'm sure they can give you great feedback. And I'm going to stop a minute so you can do this activity. So we're now at the end of Part B, and you have started to create appropriate items for gathering feedback, and you probably got good feedback from your peers. And so I'll see you in the next one. We're going to do the 3rd and the 4th learning goal. This is the end of Part B.